The Hidden Smell of Sunlight. That's in this book, which is Inversions. It's volume 5 of a scribing series. Janus had an affinity for plants and only spoke near them. Mostly what he said around houseplants was, water, water, water. And he or his mother would bring water to the jade plant or the spider plant or philodendron, which would offer bright green thanks. Weeding the tomatoes in the kitchen garden, Janus said, water, please, water, and phosphates and calcium, nitrogen. Janus got silently to his feet and brought a hose and a wheelbarrow of manure and lime to the tomato plants, which thanked him greenly with their poisonous fragrance. Janus was considered a nutcase by those who knew him. Those who didn't know him thought he was mentally challenged. 7 years old, he had never begun to talk. He was a member of a forgotten population in the Great Smoky Mountains that was thought to be inbred. No one expected him to make sense. He had never said much of anything to anybody. His mother saw that he loved plants, so she let him help her in the kitchen garden and take care of her houseplants. He always knew what each plant wanted or needed, whether it was manure, more lime, green sand, water, weeding, or just cultivation. The tomatoes, the melons, the pumpkins, and the apples on their homestead grew large and sweet and healthy, as if offering gratitude for his care. He knew so much about green things, even as a little boy, that his father said the plants must be talking to him. Janus, Janus, should have been named Janus, Janice. His mother wanted and expected a girl. She wanted a Janus, but she got him instead. She heard there was a boy's name that sounded just like Janus, and so he became Janus, Janus, the Roman small god of doorways, who saw both backward and forward. But Janus faced neither forward nor back, only the now. He had 6 older brothers and a little sister. His father wanted to tell him that he too had 6 older brothers, and that made them alike, sort of. He was saddened that Janus didn't notice his words. He was a sweet boy, quiet and within himself. He loved to lie in the grass in the pasture or in the star moss under the trees. When he lay there, his arms and legs stretched out like a snow angel, it was almost as if the grass or the moss embraced him. The first time he was aware of something beside needs and wishes of plants, he was lying in the grass under the oak tree outside their house. When he fell, was it asleep? And because it was Janus, it was strange that, was it a dream? It had little to do with plants. In his mind, he saw water awash with bits of rotten stuff and large white seabirds he would never see in the mountains of western North Carolina, feeding blue and yellow bottle caps to their ugly large-beaked chicks. A little ways beyond them, a skeleton with whitish, grayish feathers of the same kind of bird dried on a naked rock. And he spoke words that came to him just as he spoke the needs of plants. The destroyers have changed the remains of those dead 4 million years to make an evil substance that kills the birds and insects that eat it. The destroyers have created this for their brief, deadly pleasures. We're helpless against this substance. We cannot restore it to earth. He saw then a great barnacled fish-like animal rise to the surface to gulp what looked like a big transparent balloon. Balloon, he thought, warning the creature, because its death was palpable because of the balloon. And then the pale, multicolored floating things, close, but spreading far away in a huge body of water, more water than he had ever seen, bending away under a bowl of treeless, cloud-cloaked sky. Beneath all of this, a terrible distress and a deep, brooding anger. It was nightmarish, but suddenly over. He started awake, and the grass under him lay both cushioning and scratchy against his skin. "Don't be afraid, Janus," he whispered. His family went into town once a month, all 10 of them, then fewer as the older children left to form their own families. They went in an old Toyota pickup. Kids piled into the truck bed to buy coffee, canned milk, and other necessities, and entered the coal-blackened town that had been their mother's childhood home. Janus's mother always took the younger children to the Donnytown library, while his 3 brothers and his little sister found books on car repair, murder, warplanes, vampires. Janus, who was along because no one knew what else to do with him, walked from one potted plant to another, touching their leaves. Now and then he approached the librarian's desk, pointed to a plant and said, "Water." She, with a nod and a smile, filled a long-spouted pail and watered the plants he indicated. The plants thanked her greenly every time, and she began to pay more attention to them. One day in early summer, the librarian took a book from under her desk and offered it to him, opening to a drawing of an anemone blossom. Janus was startled by the illustration. He looked and looked, then smiled. "Turn the page," the librarian said. He did. More flowers that he knew well. Pink hepatica, jack in the pulpit, purple trillium, bright red wood lilies. He touched them, but they had no life. Beside and under each were the black marks for stories. The book came home with him, an illustrated book of wild plants and flowers of southern Appalachia. And that evening his mother read to him. She read 2 pages each evening when the dishes were washed and the chores were done. Janus's lips moved after her words. 2 pages in the morning when the other kids had walked the half-mile to the school bus. The parts of a plant, the shapes of different leaves and leaflets, how leaves grow, how plants are pollinated. The round greenish leaf, what flowers of wild sarsaparilla grow in a ball-shaped cluster at the end of a long flower stalk. The leaves grow on long stalks as well, each divided into leaflets. The fruits are dark blue-black berries. Wild sarsaparilla grows from an underground stem, or rhizome, which the Indian tribes brewed to make tea or root beer, or made into stimulating medicine. Why, what's this book here saying, boy? We ain't Indians, but we make sarsaparilla tea and root beer every year. Janus smiled and pointed to the illustration. The round greenish white flowers of wild sarsaparilla grow in a ball-shaped, he recited. Don't start with that, boy, I'm not finished yet. Ginseng family, it says. 6 to 15 inches tall, flowers in May and June. The root don't look just like a ginseng root, though more narrow-like, and it don't always have legs like ginseng root. I'll read you 2 more, how's that? His mother knew the reading intrigued him, and she hoped he would start talking, maybe with the words of the book. He seemed to take in the words intact, memorizing what she read as she spoke it. She didn't know if he understood the meaning, but she got him a gardening book from the library the next month and read to him the same way. 2 pages in the morning, 2 in the late afternoon. When later he lay down in the star moss under the white oak, looking up at the solidly blue-green leaves, he heard words that he spoke, and the words carried the distress and anger he had felt before. Stop the destroyers, stop the destroyers, stop the rogue species, but don't harm those who smell sunlight. Don't harm those who sing to the corn seeds. Don't harm those who smoke tobacco with snakes, nor those who eat from the earth. Only the destroyers, only them. Lying on his back under the oak tree in the sun, Janus said, "We will try again with influenza, a sweeping influenza. It will affect them alone. The destroyers are as curious as cats. We will trap them with their curiosity." "What's Janus carrying on about, Ma?" "Oh, don't mind Janus, sis. That's what he's doing, carrying on, doing his recitations." "What's sweeping influenza, Ma?" "Where'd you hear that? It's a high-class word for the egg. Girl, maybe you catches it from broom straw, now get." His father bought a riding mower at Walmart, brought it proudly home after talking about it in town until his neighbors stopped by one to see it in action. Much of what might have been a yard was taken up by vegetable garden, but Janus's father carefully poured fuel, screwed on the cap, turned the key. The machine roared to life, the cutter bar whirled and spit out a little green, plantain, grass, dandelions. Janus rushed from the house, waving his arms, screaming and grabbing at his father. His father pushed him away, and two neighbors elbowed him out of the group as the mower moved a few feet, whipping its cutting bar across the first swath of tall grass and weeds. "What's got into your boy there, Earl?" "Janus, go in the house. See to your ma," his father said over one shoulder. But Janus rushed at his father, shrieking and crying, trying first to drag him from the mower as it moved into the grass, then pulling at the steering wheel while his father hid his hands away, then finally stopped the machine. Janus leaned over and turned the key. The noise ended. Janus had been crying hard, but in the silence, he stepped away from the machine and smiled. "Thank you," he said. "You've got a problem there, Earl," the neighbor commented. "Janus don't tolerate loud noises, that's all," his father said. "I'll take him inside." "Didn't know your boy could talk, Earl," another said. "He don't. He just done said thank you, Earl, plain as day." "He done?" The next morning, the cutter bar on the new mower was gone, and the electrical ignition system was shorted and ruined. His father took Janus out and gave him a proper whipping with his belt. Afterwards, Janus ran and lay in the uncut grass, sniveling but saying over and over, "Thank you, Janus. Thank you. Thank you, Janus." One of Janus's brothers offered to fix the mower, but his father said no. And the next time he went into town, he put the mower up on eBay. There was a time every spring when bees swarmed all over the brambles and the apple and the pear trees. Every tree hummed and furry bees buzzed and flew in and out from flower to flower. It was a beautiful time, full of promise and life. Janus waited for that time, didn't really know he was waiting for it and that it hadn't happened until one day in early spring. Just a moment. Oh, out of time. I can't answer that now. Janus waited for that time, but didn't really know he was waiting for it and that it hadn't happened until one day in early spring when he was resting in the loving grass, poa anua, or bluegrass, and words came up inside him. The pollinators are dying. The neonicotinoid pesticide of the destroyers has sickened the bees. The bees lose their senses and their direction. They can't find their home. The hives are empty. And he saw the apple trees blooming emptily, and their leaves hardened into late summer, and the only fruits on them were withered tiny brown applets. Janus got to his feet and started for the bee boxes near the compost pile and saw that there were no bees flying in and out of it. He ran for his mother, who was in the house sewing on an old Rickar sewing machine. Her mother had won in a raffle in town. His little sister was doing something with a needle and thread on the floor beside her. He tapped his mother's shoulder, and she took her foot off the treadle and looked up. "The pollinators are dying," he told her earnestly. "The neonicotinoid pesticide of the destroyers has sickened the bees. The bees lose their senses and their direction. They can't find their home. The hives are empty." "The bees are fine, Janus." He shook his head violently. No. The pollinators are dying. The neonicotinoid pesticide. He pulled on her arm. "The pollinators are dying." Curious, his mother followed him outside, but the bee boxes had live bees zooming in and out, and the fruit trees were not yet in bloom. "The bees, the pollinators, are just fine, boy." And she went back to her sewing. Janus settled into the grass again, disturbed. After a few moments, comforted, he spoke words he heard. "We need the bees. Soon we will be unable to fight. The destroyers have made pesticides. We must make an effective homicide. The ancients are alive and will help. They remember how." It was a kind of prayer, Janus thought, and sat in the prayer, looking up at the sun and yonder at the mist, starting to roll up the valley. He didn't know who the ancients were, but he wanted them to protect the bees and the apples. What's the ancients, Ma? That's your elders, sis. Like your grandmam and your grandpap. What's neonicotinoid? Ain't nothing, girl. Maybe something with cigarettes. Now get with your foolishness. You know Janus. He'll carry on till the cows come home. Don't mean nothing. Curled up under the sugar maple in the star moss, looking down the valley, Janus said, we made the flu pandemic follow flu pandemic. Now we understand that they will not be destroyed by influenza. Even Ebola was in the end controllable by them, although it had potential. He liked the roll of the words as they came out of his mouth. Even Ebola was in the end controller, he repeated. Even Ebola bowl was in the end controllable. It was like a song, although it had potential. Eating a lunch of boiled greens and fatback under the oak. Watching heat rise in wiggly air from the barn roof, Janus asked, who am I, in his heart of hearts? And he spoke aloud. You, Janus, are an oxygenator, an animal. The ancients created oxygenators because the air was poisoned with oxygen, and the earth was frozen from pole to pole. The ancients divided and changed and divided. And from the division came protozoans, animals. Animals consume the poison oxygen and combined it with carbon. We live on carbon and oxygen. What the ancients created, they can also destroy. And they will eliminate the rogue animal that is destroying life. Janus nodded thoughtfully. Can I help you, he thought, and through his own mouth he was answered, you can. Once in a while, Janus never knew quite why or when it would happen, his parents took him to Atlanta to see a doctor, a man they had been told might help him learn to talk and relate to people. In the doctor's waiting room, Janus became restless, and his mother snatched up the nearest printed material at hand, Scientific American, and found the words plants in a brief. Hurriedly, she began reading. The largest genetic study ever performed to learn when land plants and fungi first appeared on the earth has revealed a plausible biological cause for the era called the Cambrian explosion, which produced the first fossils of... She flopped the magazine aside. That ain't for children, she told Janus. Mrs. Bridges, this isn't italics because Janus doesn't register it. Mrs. Bridges, I don't see how I can help you. Janus doesn't have speech, simply put. He may never learn to talk. But he does talk, Doc. He talks to them plants. He's always a-talking, just not to us. I find that a little hard to believe, Mrs. Bridges. Janus has almost no activity in the speech centers of his brain. He talks and talks. We can't understand half the highfalutin words he uses when he talks to them plants. Earl says he's doing his recitations. Sitting in a nearby chair, Janus saw a yellowing Mauna Loa plant growing out of a pot on the floor by the window. He leaned a little and put his hand gently on the sad leaves. Water, water, nitrogen, manure, water, please, he said urgently. Water, water, please, water. Janus pulled his hand away and, snatching a paper cup, ran water in the exam room sink, poured it on the roots of the Mauna Loa, and went back for more. That's quite enough, Janus. That's enough. Water, water, Janus repeated, running another 2 cupfuls, one in each hand, rushing to the Mauna Loa and dousing it with water from the top. So water ran off the leaves and onto the floor. The doctor stopped him with a hand on his wrist, but Janus pulled away and went back for more. Unable to saturate the soil so quickly, water dribbled from the bottom of the pot onto the carpet. Yes, he can say water, Mrs. Bridges. I'm surprised, but that's not talking. But you heard him, Doc. He said other things too. Nitrogen, didn't you hear that? And manure? Surely you heard him say that. You should hear him lying in the grass saying all sorts of things I don't even know the sense of. I'm afraid you're misinterpreting babble, Mrs. Bridges. Janus, stop. Now, I'll water that plant when you've left. Janus, you hear? Janus didn't hear. Water, he repeated over and over, until the doctor filled a pitcher and emptied it onto the soil in the pot. Are you satisfied, Janus? Please stop now. You're getting water on the carpet. Janus was taken from the room by 3 nurses and sent home with his mother, who took him outside to the star moss growing softly beneath the white oak. Just lay there, boy. The doctor will water his plant now that he knows it needs it. Janus lay shaking for a quarter hour, then spoke. So it is with the destroyers. The words came from the oak, which rarely said anything. They bring us away from the sun and the rain and forget us. Much of their evil is simple lack of concern, great concern for their own pleasures and amnesia of everything important. The moss comforted him, cradled him. Janus said, "It's not your fault, Janus. Rest." And he did. Edgar Harbinger, MD, PhD in the psychiatry of autism at State University Hospital, was eaten with curiosity. The boy from the Great Smokies had spoken when it was neurologically impossible for him to speak. And what he had said, though not very conversational, should have been beyond his ken. Water, yes, but nitrogen, manure? Granted, the kid might know of manure considering his surroundings, but nitrogen? It simply didn't make sense. The boy had said water, nitrogen, manure, quite clearly and definitely, not a bit muddled. And he had rushed to bring the plant water, which granted, seemed to be its most urgent need. His receptionist was in charge of watering the office plants, but spent most of her days playing video games. It bothered him. For 2 weeks, he mentioned it to his wife, to his colleagues, to other autism therapists. It didn't make sense. He ran the moment by in his head again and again. It came to him in the middle of supper on Friday. His wife had fried catfish, which put him in mind of the Great Smokies and the boy Janus something or other. And the moment when the boy had leaned over and touched the plants and suddenly exploded with speech. Realization flooded his mind. The boy didn't want water. The plant wanted water. It must be the plant speaking through the boy. The mother had said that boy talked to the plants, but what if the plants were talking to him or through him? That would explain a lot. But plants don't talk. They don't think. They don't have the equipment to think, and certainly not to speak. The boy could be their equipment to speak. Edgar Harbinger saw a publishable study, possibly tenure at State. The next morning in his office, he pulled up the boy's record on his notepad. Out in the sugar bush with his next older brother, sitting in the soft green moss and surrounded by darling Princess Pine ground moss, Janus said, Ebola was almost effective, and one of the half-living ancients not long ago took millions of them. It had a latency of 10 days and a contagion period without symptoms of 22 days, and then killed quickly over 5 days. They called it Black Death. The contagion period is most effective in capturing and killing them because, like us, they're gregarious. Contagion by breath, by touch, by bodily fluids. The grass, the mosses will help with transmission. We will bring you the half-living. We are everywhere. The boy will help. What do you mean we're everywhere, Ma? We was just a-setting right there in the sugar bush. Don't pay Janus no mind, boy. Doctor says it's just babble, like the Tower of in the good book. Dr. Harbinger arrived by train in Donnytown on June 17th and tried to rent a car to drive out to Janus's home, without luck. There was a taxi in Donnytown, but the taxi driver was planting his corn that week. In the end, he borrowed a horse and a guide and felt wonderfully rustic, and later awfully sore. The horse shuffled along the mountain trace, stirring up a world of dust. Harvey Ditmore, the guide, explained that shambling gait helped the horse keep its footing on treacherous trails. The remoteness excited Dr. Harbinger even more, who didn't realize that there was also a road to the Bridges house, longer but more accessible. No other researcher had or would undergo the sacrifice he was making to get this astonishing and undiscovered knowledge. He alone would collect and publish it. Janus was watching the sunset over the mountains, noticing the formation in the south called Ghost Mountain that only appeared when the sun was about to set. He said in a low voice, "The half-living ancients have evolved a new homicide with a longer period of contagion, a faster death that will cause their brains to bleed them to death. It will affect only the destroyers. We love those who smell sunlight, those who are one with us, who see the living earth, who sing to their corn and smoke tobacco with snakes. We love you." Janus knew the plants loved him. He never doubted it for an instant. Curiosity has captured a destroyer. He is on his way to you, Janus. The Bridges were not happy to see Edgar Harbinger that afternoon, but he talked them around, told them it would be good for the boy, that maybe what he had in mind would stimulate the speech centers in Janus's brain. He would attach electrodes to see where the speech was coming from. Yes, of course the boy could lie in the grass while he did his work. It might quiet him so he'd be easier to work with. "But Doc, why'd you come here? We could have brung him to town for you," Janus's father offered. "Much better for him to be comfortable at home, Mr. Bridges. Then he won't get upset as he did in my office last month. He ruined my carpet." "Janus don't wee on the floor, Doc." Janus's father was shocked. Janus's mother broke in to clarify. "'Twarn't wee, Earl. 'Twere water. Doc here hadn't watered his little potted palm tree in maybe 3 months. Poor plant was thirsty." Janus's father shrugged and went out to talk to Harvey Ditmore, the guide. Janus was hoeing potatoes when they went outside, but his mother told him to lie down in the moss under the oak tree and told him what the doctor had in mind. When the doctor approached, Janus curled into a fetal position on the moss. His mother tried to talk him out, told him he could be normal, like his brothers. He'd be able to talk on his own to people. He tensed and curled more into himself. In his mind was a terrible thought. The destroyer is here. But then kind words came from his mouth. "Don't be afraid, relax, boy. Curiosity has drawn the destroyer to us. The time is coming and you're going to help us. The ancients are ready." Dr. Harbinger smiled and thought, that's more like it. I was right. Oh my God, I was right. And dreams of research studies flew up in his mind. Presentations of paper, a book, a tenure, perhaps. Maybe a Nobel Prize for research in parapsychology. He had 2 graduate students who could help him out over the summer. They would be as excited as he was. Janus lay back in the moss then, spread-eagled like a snow angel. He paid no attention to the doctor, who fiddled and fooled with his devices, touched him with his electrodes, recording brain waves, recording hours of audio. Janus said, "The ancients are coming, Janus. They're bringing the half-living ancients. It's coming, the homicide." And then because the doctor wanted to hear speech, and Janus thought he would give him what he wanted, he began to recite the book about the wildflowers of southern Appalachia, word for word, starting with the introduction. That evening, having forced himself on the Bridges for dinner in the night, Dr. Harbinger called his wife, an ethnobotanist, on a worn black telephone with a rotary dial and a party line. There was no cell phone service. "It's the earth or the grass, Helen. It's something talking through the boy." "What do you know about grass, Helen? Tell me, can it be talking?" "It can't," she said flatly. "But First Nations people sometimes sing to their corn. Maybe that's what's going on." "The boy doesn't talk, he never has. But then he comes out with whole paragraphs of erudite blather. It's not him, it's the plants, and he's their voice." "What are they saying?" his wife had to ask. "Oh, I don't know, something about half-dead ancients, zombies or something, and a murder, a homicide. Maybe it's the ghost of an old homicide that settled in the grass. It doesn't matter." "It might matter. When the earth speaks, it's a good idea to listen," his wife said. And he could hear that she wasn't smiling. Harbinger forced an amused snort. Right, and maybe it's leprechauns. See what you can find out about grasses, would you? I know about grasses. They're the most prevalent green plants on Earth. They cover about a quarter of the land surface of Earth. There are over 10,000 species and 800 genera of grasses, and they don't cross the water. Each genus is pretty much limited to its own continent. Only one species is on all continents, and that's Phragmites, the tall reedgrass with a fluffy seed head you see on the roadsides. Phragmites is all over between latitudes 70 and 40 degrees. 70 degrees north and 40 degrees south. But Edgar, there's absolutely no evidence of intelligence or communication. Has to be a plant talking, Helen, and it's not Phragmites. It's just ordinary bluegrass and plain old star moss. Keep looking, honey. Maybe it's the fungal mat underneath the grass. Some researchers think that's sentient, something like a huge internet. It can carry water, nutrients, and microorganisms from plant to plant. But listen to what the boy says, or whoever. Harbinger signed off after that. He wondered if he could get the boy out in the grass at night, but decided against it, not because it would be hard on the boy, but because he himself was exhausted and had only an uncushioned deacon's bench to sleep on and an outdoor privy to pee into. He didn't know that Janus was out there already, on his back in the pasture, watching the stars. It was a warm June night, and there was a meteor shower. He fell asleep in the embrace of the grasses, watching shooting stars. His mother came out around 10 and covered him with a quilt and kissed him goodnight. In the morning, Dr. Harbinger explained how important it was to study Janus's mind when he was speaking. Mrs. Bridges inclined her head toward the door. He's a-waiting for you. He come in for breakfast about 6:30. He finished hilling up them potatoes, watered and fed the tomatoes, leafed the cabbage heads, and took a cup of coffee out to the sugar maple. The sugar maple needs coffee, Harbinger almost said, but didn't. Who could guess what these crazy mountain people gave their trees? Where's the sugar maple, ma'am? He asked. Yonder. His mother jerked her chin in a direction. Turned out he didn't need to know what a sugar maple looked like because the boy was seated under a tree just beyond the vegetable garden, nursing a cup of coffee between his hands, an 8-year-old. Harbinger took his instruments and walked over to him carefully. Janus eyed him, set the coffee down, and spread out on the moss. The boy had apparently situated himself in the midst of a wide circle of flat yellow-brown mushrooms. Or had they grown up around him while he was sitting there? Edgar Harbinger trampled several getting to the boy, but Janus didn't protest or cry out and let the doctor attach electrodes to various shaved points on his scalp and set up his recording devices. Good, Janus, no fighting today. Maybe just a couple more hours of recording. Then I'll try the electrodes on the grass and the tree, and we'll see where your words are coming from. Janus didn't move. The mushrooms sent up a smoke of sporata, and Janus spoke in a low voice. The time is now, Janus. It is your time to save us all. We thank you, boy. We thank you. We thank you. Janus smiled blissfully. We love you. We love you. We love you. In a fog of virus-bearing spores, Dr. Harbinger recorded every word, leaned close with his microphone to hear the words that were almost whispered, thought that somehow Janus's low voice was multiplied by thousands, echoing back and back within him. But that was probably the microphone. Edgar Harbinger flew out of Atlanta on June 27th to speak at an international medical conference in Switzerland, attended by scientists from every nation. He was at the end of the 10-day latency period of hemorrhagic brain fever, HBF1. He infected everyone on the several airplanes he took. The ventilation was a closed system. A number of airport personnel in Atlanta, Brussels, and Zurich. 10 days later, all these people unknowingly infected others, who a month after Dr. Harbinger left Atlanta, infected everyone with whom they came in contact. The first death from HBF1 was Dr. Harbinger himself. 2 weeks after his return from Geneva, he collapsed with a stroke, bled from every opening in his head, and was dead within a few hours, in spite of every effort to save him. He infected all the medical personnel who came in contact with him. His wife died similarly a week later. While its highly pathogenic strain was spreading wildly in 2019, hemorrhagic brain fever reached Australia in September, and the Middle East and Africa 2 months later. On January 3rd, 2020, China reported its 500th human death in a week due to HBF1, followed by uncounted fatalities in South and Southeast Asia. The source of HBF1 is thought to have been a medical conference in Geneva, Switzerland, in July 2019. Epidemiologists theorized that it might have been an escaped American biological warfare virus. Quoted in HBF1, Hemorrhagic Brain Fever Comments on Its History, published by Rough Rock Hospital, Navajo Nation, 2022. Hemorrhagic brain fever, HBF1, has a latency of 10 days, followed by an infectious period of 22 days, followed by a symptomatic period of 1 to 3 days with almost universal mortality. At first, HBF1 was thought to be a form of avian influenza, but in form it's closer to Ebola, with a significant difference that it's contagious for 22 days before symptoms appear. Neither bats, birds, other mammals, nor tribal humans contract the virus, although it all can harbor it when the virus appears in their droppings. When the droppings are in grass, the virus persists there and can enter whatever life form it comes in contact with. It was determined in a brief study that although other life forms harbor the virus, only humans, and then only humans with heavy phthalate loads from plastic food packaging, actually sicken and die from it. Encyclopedia Online, Hemorrhagic Brain Fever, HBF1, by John Baker Ross, MD, PhD, Cherokee, Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Janus and his family had only a brief bout of flu, as did the neighboring Cherokee farmers. He continued to speak words from the plants until he died at 56, fed and helped by those who loved him. He unknowingly spread the infection to everyone he encountered, and they passed it on. It was a well-targeted homicide.
Well, my hair stood on end towards the end of that.
Oh, that's good. It's funny that it is in some ways similar to COVID-19, that it has this period where some people have it and they don't know they have it and nothing happens to them, and other people have it and die from it. Mm-hmm. Then it has this long period of contagion with no symptoms. It's so similar that maybe the plants thought of it.
Where did the idea come from?
Oh, I read a book about the fungal mat being an internet for trees. That trees can bring the good effects to sunlight from the edge of the forest to trees further inside the forest by means of the fungal mat.
Wow.
And that if somebody comes into the forest and is cutting trees, they send an alert message to trees further in. A lot of good it does them, but that's what they do. So
wow. That's pretty amazing. And this was in a magazine?
No,
no, a book.
It was a book. It's Scribings Volume 5, and the Scribings Volume 5 title is Inversions. So every story in it is a little flip-flopped of what you would expect, and this one as well. And the cover is cool. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah. Look.
Oh.
So the actual photo is upside down.
Ah,
The drawing is right side up.
very nice.
Yeah, it's
Who published it?
uh, Lost Luggage Studios,
Mhm.
which is in Portland, Maine. But
Mhm.
you can get it online. It's in the Ingram catalog, and it's here and there. And it's full of flip-flop stories.
Boy, thank you.
Yeah, you can get the book from almost anywhere. It's called Scribings Volume 5 Inversions, and the editor is Jamie Belanger.
Hmm.